The salt-stained letter arrived at Widow's Point on a Tuesday morning when the fog hung thick as burial shrouds over the Massachusetts coast. Martha Henley found it slipped beneath her boarding house door, the parchment heavy with seawater and something darker, something that made her fingers tingle as she unfolded it. To any woman brave enough to answer, "I am Captain Ezra Blackwater of the Widow's Tide. I seek not gold nor glory, but a companion willing to share the endless silence of the ocean. I offer comfort, protection, and a life beyond the ordinary world's reach. If fear does not rule your heart, come to Salem Harbor when the moon is new. Look for the black sails." Martha read the letter 3 times before setting it on her kitchen table. At 32, she had been called spinster more often than her own name. Her parents were long buried, her boarding house barely profitable, and the town treated her like furniture. Present, but unremarkable. The letter felt like a door opening in a wall she hadn't known existed. Word spread through Salem like wildfire through dry timber. By week's end, 17 women had received identical letters, each found in impossible places, tucked inside locked jewelry boxes, pinned to bedroom walls, floating in wash basins. The town buzzed with excitement and terror in equal measure. "Pirates don't take wives," declared Mrs. Abernathy at the general store. "They take prisoners." But desperation breeds courage, and Salem had no shortage of desperate women. Widows with empty pantries, daughters of bankrupted merchants, women whose reputations had been ruined by wagging tongues. They all saw salvation in black ink and seawater. The new moon rose like a silver coin over Salem Harbor, and 16 women gathered at the docks. They came dressed in their finest gowns, carrying packed trunks and beating hearts. Martha arrived last, wearing her mother's simple blue dress and carrying only a small leather satchel. The harbor stretched dark and still, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against weathered posts. Then, as if materialized from the very shadows, the Widow's Tide emerged from the fog. She was magnificent and terrible, a 3-masted monster with sails black as midnight, and a hull that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the moonlight. Ghostly figures moved along her rigging, their forms translucent against the stars. The ship's figurehead was a woman frozen in an eternal scream, her wooden arms reaching toward the shore as if trying to escape her prison. The first woman to flee was young Rebecca Morton, who took one look at the spectral crew and ran sobbing into the night. Within minutes, others followed. Sarah Whitmore fainted dead away when she saw a rope tie itself into knots. Elizabeth Hartwell screamed when a lantern lit itself with blue flame. One by one, they abandoned their trunks and their dreams, until only Martha remained on the dock. The ship's gangplank lowered with a grinding creak that sounded like cemetery gates opening. At its top stood a figure that made the darkness itself seem bright in comparison. Captain Ezra Blackwater was a man carved from storm and sorrow. His face bore scars that spoke of battles with more than mortal enemies, jagged lines that glowed faintly silver in the moonlight. His coat was midnight blue, his hat adorned with feathers that moved without wind. But it was his eyes that held Martha's attention. Eyes like deep water, ancient and weary, and surprisingly gentle. "You stayed," he said, his voice carrying the authority of thunder and the weariness of centuries. "I did," Martha replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Do you know what I am?" Martha studied his scarred face. "The ghostly crew. The ship that defied natural law. You're a man who's been alone too long." Something flickered in those deep water eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or hope. The others saw a monster. "I see someone who writes letters asking for companionship instead of demanding it." Martha picked up her satchel and stepped toward the gangplank. "May I come aboard, Captain?" For a long moment he simply stared at her. Then slowly he extended his hand. His skin was cold as ocean depths, but solid and real. "Welcome aboard the Widow's Tide, Martha Henley." As her feet touched the ship's deck, Martha felt the world shift around her. The harbor lights of Salem flickered and faded, and she knew with absolute certainty that her old life was ending. Whatever lay ahead would be extraordinary, terrifying, and utterly unlike anything she had ever imagined. The Widow's Tide began to move without anchor being raised or sails unfurled, gliding away from shore as silently as a dream. Martha stood beside the captain, watching Salem shrink to a collection of distant lights, and wondered if she had just made the wisest or most foolish decision of her life. The Widow's Tide sailed through waters that obeyed no earthly compass. Martha watched the stars wheel overhead in patterns that defied navigation, constellations shifting like living things against the velvet sky. The ship moved through fog banks that whispered secrets and waves that glowed with their own inner light. Captain Blackwater stood at the helm, his hands steady on a wheel carved from what looked like bone. The ghostly crew worked around them, translucent figures that handled ropes and adjusted sails with practiced efficiency. They acknowledged Martha with respectful nods but never spoke, their mouths moving in silent conversations she couldn't hear. "They've been with me longer than I care to remember," Ezra said, noticing her gaze. "Good men who chose to stay when death came calling." Chose? Martha moved closer, the deck solid beneath her feet despite the supernatural nature of their vessel. Death isn't always the end for those who die with purpose unfulfilled. His scarred hands tightened on the wheel. "They stayed to help me find what I was looking for." "And what was that?" Instead of answering, he led her below deck to his cabin. The room was larger than should have been possible given the ship's dimensions, filled with charts that showed waters no living cartographer had ever mapped. Books lined the walls, volumes bound in strange leather with titles in languages Martha didn't recognize. A massive window dominated the far wall, showing not the ocean they sailed but glimpses of other places, other times. "I wasn't always what you see now," Ezra began, pouring 2 cups of rum that tasted of spices from distant shores. "Once, I was just a merchant sailor with dreams of honest profit and a simple life. That was before I found the Siren's heart." He gestured to a locked chest in the corner, bound with chains that seemed to move of their own accord. A ruby the size of a man's fist, pulled from the depths near the Devil's Triangle. Beautiful beyond description and cursed beyond redemption. The moment I touched it, my fate was sealed. Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean air. What kind of curse? To sail forever, unable to find peace on land or sea, until I found someone who could love the monster I'd become. His laugh was bitter as winter wind. "The ruby feeds on isolation, grows stronger with each year of loneliness. It transformed my ship, my crew, even my appearance." He removed his hat, revealing hair that was silver white despite his relatively young face. The scars on his skin seemed to pulse faintly, like veins filled with starlight instead of blood. "Every woman who's ever come aboard has fled in terror, some before they even set foot on deck. But you keep trying. Hope is sometimes all that separates the living from the truly damned." He replaced his hat, shadows falling across his features. "The curse grows stronger each year. Soon, I'll lose what humanity remains to me. The Widow's Tide will become a true ghost ship, and I'll be nothing more than another story sailors tell to frighten landlubbers." Martha set down her cup and studied his face. In the lamplight, she could see past the scars to the man beneath, someone who had carried an impossible burden for longer than any soul should endure. "How long has it been since you touched land?" 37 years, 4 months, and 16 days. The precision of his answer broke her heart. "And in all that time, no one has stayed? You're the first to even board the ship." He moved to the window, gazing out at waters that reflected no earthly moon. "Most flee the moment they see what I've become. Others make it aboard but leave when they realize the magnitude of what they've involved themselves in. What happens to them? I return them safely to shore with their memories intact, but their desire to speak of what they've seen diminished. It's kinder that way." Martha joined him at the window, watching strange sea creatures glide through the phosphorescent depths. "The letter you've sent it before?" "Dozens of times over the decades. Different towns, different ports, always the same result." He turned to face her, his expression unguarded for the first time since she'd met him. "Why didn't you run, Martha? What made you different?" She considered the question, searching for an answer that wouldn't sound foolish. "I suppose I recognized loneliness when I saw it. And..." She hesitated, then continued. "I've spent my entire life being ordinary, unremarkable. When I read your letter, I thought perhaps being extraordinary might be worth the risk." Ezra stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in the depths of his ancient eyes. "You may come to regret that choice. Perhaps. But I'd rather regret something I did than something I didn't do." Outside, the wind began to pick up, and Martha felt the ship change course. Through the mystical window, she glimpsed rocky coastlines and storm-lashed shores that existed in no earthly ocean. "Where are we going?" "To the threshold waters," Ezra replied, his voice heavy with meaning she didn't yet understand. "There's something you need to see if you're truly going to stay. Something that will test whether your courage extends beyond the merely romantic." The ship lurched suddenly, and Martha gripped the window frame for support. In the distance, she could see lights that pulsed like heartbeats and hear singing that made her soul ache with longing. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Ezra said quietly, "know that you've already given me something I thought lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope." The threshold waters appeared at dawn like a fever dream made manifest. Martha woke in the small cabin Ezra had prepared for her, a room that somehow felt larger on the inside than the outside, with a porthole that showed not the ocean, but glimpses of memories that weren't her own. She dressed quickly and climbed to the deck, where she found the captain standing motionless at the bow, his coat billowing in winds that carried whispers from a dozen different languages. Before them stretched waters unlike anything in the natural world. The sea here was a tapestry of impossible colors, deep purples that bled into silver, gold that shifted to emerald green with each wave. Islands floated in the air above the water's surface, connected by bridges of crystallized mist. In the distance, waterfalls flowed upward into storm clouds that rained diamonds instead of water, the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the lost, Ezra explained without turning around. "Every soul claimed by the sea eventually passes through here. Some find peace and move on. Others," he gestured toward shapes moving beneath the surface, massive shadows that could have been ships or sea creatures or something altogether more sinister. The ghostly crew worked with increased urgency, their transparent forms flickering like candle flames in a strong wind. Martha noticed they seemed more solid here, their features clearer, their movements more deliberate. One of them, a young man with kind eyes and a powder burn across his cheek, approached her with what might have been a smile. "That's Timothy," Ezra said, finally turning to face her. He was barely 17 when a Spanish galleon's cannon took half his face. Chose to stay when death came for him because he said I reminded him of his older brother. Timothy nodded respectfully to Martha, his mouth moving in silent words she somehow understood. "Welcome aboard, miss. The captain's been waiting a long time for someone like you." "He can speak?" Martha asked, startled. "Here, in the threshold waters, the barriers between life and death grow thin. They become more themselves, remember who they were before they chose this half-existence." Ezra's expression grew troubled. "But it also means the curse becomes stronger. The siren's heart feeds on the energy of this place." As if summoned by his words, a low thrumming began to emanate from somewhere deep within the ship. The sound was hypnotic, almost musical, but underneath its beauty lay something hungry and cold. Martha felt it pulling at her, trying to draw her toward the locked chest in the captain's cabin. "Fight it," Ezra warned, gripping her shoulder. His touch was like an anchor, grounding her against the ruby's influence. "The heart knows you're here now. It will try to corrupt you, turn you against me, use you to break the last of my restraints." The ship shuddered as something massive moved beneath them. Through the crystal-clear waters, Martha could see the outline of a vessel far larger than the Widow's Tide, a ship with hundreds of masts and sails made of what looked like human skin. Figures moved on its deck, but at this distance, she couldn't tell if they were alive or dead. "The damned armada," Ezra said grimly. "Ships and crews that fell completely to curses like mine. They patrol these waters, seeking others to add to their fleet." A sound like breaking glass filled the air, and one of the floating islands began to descend toward the water. As it drew closer, Martha could see it wasn't an island at all but a massive piece of a city. Buildings and streets and parks, all perfectly preserved but utterly empty. The architecture was unlike anything she'd ever seen, with spires that twisted like corkscrews and bridges that defied gravity. "New Atlantis," Ezra explained, "a city that tried to escape death by separating itself from the mortal world. It succeeded after a fashion, but the price was higher than its inhabitants expected." As the floating city fragment touched the water's surface, figures began to appear on its streets, translucent people going about their daily business, unaware that their world had ended centuries ago. Children played in parks where the flowers were made of crystallized tears. Merchants sold goods that turned to mist when touched. Lovers embraced in doorways that led to nowhere. "They don't know they're dead," Martha whispered, horrified and fascinated in equal measure. "The curse of those who try to cheat death. Eternal life without the possibility of living." Ezra's voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "They exist in a perfect moment, forever, never aging, never changing, never truly alive." The thrumming from the ship's hold grew stronger, and Martha felt something shift in the air around them. The siren's heart was responding to the proximity of so much supernatural energy. feeding off the concentrated despair and longing that permeated the threshold waters. Timothy and the other ghostly crew members began to flicker more violently, their forms becoming unstable. One by one, they turned to look at Martha with expressions of desperate hope and terrible fear. She realized they were trying to tell her something, their silent mouths forming words she strained to understand. The choice must be made, before the heart, before it's too late. Save him. Save us all. What choice? Martha demanded, turning to Ezra. What are they trying to tell me? But before he could answer, the water around them began to churn. The massive shadow beneath the surface was rising, and Martha could see it was indeed a ship, the flagship of the damned armada, its hull encrusted with barnacles that looked suspiciously like human skulls. Its captain stood at the bow, a figure so corrupted by supernatural forces that he barely retained human shape. Captain Mordecai Wraith, Ezra spat. He was like me once, cursed by a different artifact but cursed nonetheless. The difference is he embraced his damnation instead of fighting it. The phantom ship broke the surface in an explosion of foam and seaweed, its bone-white sails billowing with winds from the underworld. Captain Wraith's voice carried across the water like the tolling of funeral bells. Ezra Blackwater, how long has it been, old friend? Still playing at redemption, I see. Still clinging to the delusion that love can break what the deep waters have wrought. I won't let you add the widow's tide to your fleet, Mordecai. Ezra called back, his hand moving to the cutlass at his side, a blade that gleamed with its own inner light. Wraith's laughter was like the sound of breaking bones. Who said anything about your ship? It's the woman I want. The heart calls to her, can't you feel it? She's the key, Ezra. The final piece needed to complete your transformation. Give her to me, and I'll make her corruption swift and merciful. Martha felt the truth of those words resonate in her bones. The siren's heart was indeed calling to her, trying to use her presence to complete whatever dark work it had begun decades ago. But she also felt something else, a growing connection to Ezra, to his crew, to the strange half-life they'd all chosen over oblivion. The choice, she said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. It's not about whether to stay or go. It's about what kind of person I choose to become. Ezra looked at her with a mixture of pride and terror. Martha, you don't understand the full scope of... Then explain it to me, she interrupted, stepping closer to him as Captain Wraith's ship moved to intercept them. All of it. No more half-truths or gentle evasions. If I'm going to choose, I need to know exactly what I'm choosing between. Around them, the threshold waters began to sing, a haunting melody that spoke of love and loss, redemption and damnation, the eternal struggle between hope and despair. The floating city continued its slow descent, its ghostly inhabitants unaware that their eternal moment was about to be shattered by a battle between the living and the damned. And in the depths of the widow's tide, the siren's heart pulsed like a malevolent star, waiting for Martha Henley to make the choice that would determine not just her fate, but the fate of every soul aboard the ship that sailed between worlds. The battle began not with cannon fire but with whispers, thousands of voices from the deep calling Martha's name, each one a different inflection of temptation and promise. Captain Wraith's ship, the Bone Harvest, circled the widow's tide like a predator stalking wounded prey, its crew of the truly damned manning positions with weapons forged from cursed metals and despair itself. Listen to me carefully, Ezra said urgently, drawing Martha away from the rail as spectral cannonballs began to streak through the air around them. The siren's heart has been building to this moment for 37 years. Every lonely night, every failed attempt at breaking the curse, every woman who fled in terror, it all fed the ruby's power. You're not just the key to my redemption, Martha. You're the final ingredient in a spell that will turn me into something like Wraith. The ship lurched as phantom chains shot from the Bone Harvest, wrapping around the widow's tide's masts with the sound of grinding tombstones. Timothy and the ghostly crew fought back with ethereal weapons, their forms solidifying in the supernatural atmosphere of the threshold waters until they seemed almost alive again. What kind of spell? Martha demanded, helping Ezra cut through one of the spectral chains with his enchanted cutlass. The blade sang as it worked, its light growing brighter with each severed link. A binding that will anchor my soul permanently to the curse, make me a lord of the damned like Wraith. In exchange, I would gain the power to claim other ships, other souls, building an armada of the lost. His voice was heavy with self-loathing. The heart whispers to me constantly, promising an end to loneliness, an end to hope, an end to the pain of trying to remain human. Around them, the battle intensified. The floating city of New Atlantis had begun to crack and crumble as it touched the water, its ghostly inhabitants finally awakening to their true state. Their screams of realization echoed across the threshold waters, a symphony of despair that fed both the Siren's heart and Captain Wraith's growing power. But there's another way, Ezra continued, deflecting a cutlass thrust from one of Wraith's boarding party. A skeletal thing that had once been human, but was now little more than animate hatred wrapped in tattered cloth. The curse can be broken, but only through a choice made freely with full knowledge of the consequences. Martha felt the deck shudder beneath her feet as something massive struck the ship's hull. Through the chaos of battle, she could see more ships rising from the depths, the entire damned armada answering Wraith's call. They were outnumbered 100 to 1, facing an enemy that couldn't truly die and had nothing left to lose. What consequences? She shouted over the din of supernatural warfare. Before Ezra could answer, the ship's hold exploded in a pillar of crimson light. The Siren's heart had broken free of its containment, rising through the deck like a malevolent sun. The ruby was indeed the size of a man's fist, but calling it beautiful seemed inadequate. It was a crystallized drop of the ocean's deepest desires, every love song ever sung to the waves, every sailor's last prayer before drowning. And it was hungry. The moment the heart appeared, every combatant on both ships stopped fighting. The ghostly crew of the Widow's Tide stared at it with expressions of hope and terror. Wraith's damned soldiers reached toward it with skeletal fingers. Even the dying city of New Atlantis seemed to lean in its direction, drawn by the promise of power over death itself. Choose, Martha Henley. The heart spoke, its voice like waves on a distant shore. Take me willingly, and I will give you everything you've ever desired. Love that spans eternity, power over life and death, beauty that will never fade. You need only accept what I offer and stop fighting what you know you want. Martha felt the ruby's influence washing over her like a warm tide. It showed her visions of herself as a queen of the supernatural seas, standing beside a transformed Ezra, who looked at her with adoration, instead of the wary hope she saw in his eyes now. She saw the Widow's Tide remade as a palace ship, its ghostly crew replaced by living servants who catered to her every whim. She saw herself with power enough to reshape the very ocean, to bring back the dead, to punish everyone who had ever dismissed her as ordinary and unremarkable. Martha, no. Ezra's voice seemed to come from very far away. That's not love, that's possession. The heart doesn't grant wishes, it devours them. But the visions continued, more seductive with each passing moment. She saw herself young forever, desired by everyone who looked upon her, feared and respected across every ocean of the world. The lonely boarding house owner from Salem faded like a bad dream, replaced by someone magnificent and terrible, and utterly beyond the reach of ordinary human pain. Then, cutting through the ruby's hypnotic influence, came a different voice, Timothy's, suddenly audible in the chaos. Miss, look around you. See what it really offers. Martha blinked, forcing herself to focus on the present moment instead of the heart's promised future. What she saw made her stomach turn. The visions the ruby had shown her weren't fantasies. They were memories. She was seeing the fates of other women who had accepted similar offers over the centuries, women who had become the figureheads of cursed ships, their consciousness trapped in wooden bodies while their souls served as anchors for supernatural vessels. The woman carved into the Widow's Tide's bow. She had been real once, a merchant's daughter named Isabella, who had accepted a sea witch's bargain 300 years ago. The screaming expression on her wooden face wasn't artistic interpretation. It was a perfect representation of her eternal torment. The choice isn't between loneliness and love, Martha realized, speaking the words aloud as understanding flooded through her. It's between easy lies and difficult truth. The Siren's heart pulsed brighter, its influence intensifying. You understand nothing, foolish girl. I offer reality, the only reality that matters. Power over your own fate, control over those who would control you. Take me and never again will anyone dismiss you or overlook you or treat you as less than you deserve. And what do I deserve? Martha asked, stepping closer to the floating ruby despite Ezra's warning shout. Everything, the heart whispered. Everything and everyone. The world bowing at your feet, the ocean singing your name. Love that burns like stars and lasts like stone. Martha reached out, her fingers inches from the ruby's surface. She could feel its power calling to her, promising to fill every empty space in her soul, to answer every question she'd ever had about her worth and purpose. It would be so easy to take it, to become someone who mattered, someone who could never again be ignored or forgotten. Instead, she closed her eyes and thought about the letter that had brought her here, not the promises it contained, but the loneliness that had prompted its writing. She thought about Ezra's scarred face and ancient eyes, about the gentle way he'd helped her aboard his ship, about 37 years of hoping for someone who would stay. She thought about Timothy and the ghostly crew, choosing to remain in limbo rather than abandon their captain to his curse. "I know what I deserve," she said finally, opening her eyes to meet the heart's crimson glow. "I deserve to choose my own path, to make my own mistakes, to find love that doesn't require the corruption of my soul or the enslavement of others. I deserve to be ordinary and extraordinary in my own way, not because some cursed gem makes me so." She pulled her hand back, and the heart's scream of fury shattered every piece of glass on both ships. "Then you choose death," Captain Wraith roared from across the water. "If she won't take the heart willingly, I'll force it into her corpse and—" His words were cut off as Ezra's cutlass found his throat. The two captains had somehow ended up on the same deck, locked in single combat while their crews battled around them. But this was no ordinary sword fight. Their blades moved like lightning, leaving trails of starfire and shadow, each strike resonating with supernatural force. "You always were too sentimental, Blackwater," Wraith snarled, his own weapon, a cutlass forged from the bones of drowned children, sparking against Ezra's consecrated steel. "Love makes you weak. Attachment makes you vulnerable. I learned that lesson decades ago. And look what it's made you," Ezra replied, his scarred face grim with determination. "A parasite feeding on misery, a creature so empty that you need to steal others' hope to feel anything at all." The siren's heart, frustrated by Martha's rejection, began to pulse with increasing violence. Cracks appeared in the air around it, showing glimpses of other worlds, other possibilities, realities where Martha had made different choices, where she had accepted its power and become just another beautiful monster ruling over an empty kingdom. But in all those glimpses, one thing remained constant. In every reality where she took the easy path, where she accepted power without price, she was alone, surrounded by servants and supplicants and subjects, but fundamentally, eternally alone. "I see you now," Martha said to the heart, her voice carrying across the battle-torn deck. "You don't offer love or companionship. You offer the illusion of being loved while making it impossible to actually love anyone. You're the loneliness curse wearing a crown." The ruby's light began to flicker, its power wavering for the first time in centuries. Martha turned to where Ezra and Wraith still fought, their battle having moved to the rigging of the Widow's Tide, each man seeking the advantage of higher ground. "Ezra," she called out, "the choice, it's not mine to make alone, is it?" He glanced down at her, understanding dawning in his ancient eyes. "No," he called back, parrying a vicious thrust that would have opened his throat. "The curse requires two choices, one to break it, one to accept the consequences of breaking it." "What consequences?" Captain Wraith's laugh was like breaking glass. "Death, you simpleton. The heart has kept him alive for 37 years beyond his natural span. Break the curse and he crumbles to dust like he should have decades ago." Martha felt her heart stop. All this time she'd assumed breaking the curse would free Ezra to live a normal life. Instead, it would end the only life he had left. "There has to be another way," she said desperately. "There is," Ezra replied, driving Wraith back with a flurry of strikes. "But it requires something I've never been brave enough to ask of anyone." "What?" "Everything." The siren's heart pulsed again, sensing opportunity in Martha's confusion and fear. "See how he deceives you even now? Take me, and I will give him true immortality, not this half-life existence. You can save him and rule beside him forever." But Martha had learned to read the spaces between the heart's words. True immortality meant true damnation, transformation into something like Wraith, powerful but empty, eternal but joyless. "Tell me," she said to Ezra, "all of it. No more protective half-truths." He drove Wraith back another step, then spoke without taking his eyes off his opponent. "The curse can be transferred willingly from one person to another. If you choose to take it, I go free. But you become bound to the Widow's Tide. cursed to sail forever unless you find someone else willing to take your place. And if we break it entirely? The ship returns to the natural world, the crew finds their rest, and He paused to block a particularly vicious attack. I face whatever judgment awaits someone who spent 37 years commanding the dead. Martha looked around the deck at Timothy and the other ghostly crew members. They were all watching her now, their transparent faces filled with hope and resignation in equal measure. They had chosen to stay with Ezra not out of loyalty to him personally, but out of belief in the possibility of redemption, the idea that love could triumph over curse, that hope could outlast despair. There's a third option, she said suddenly. Both captains paused in their fighting, and even the siren's heart seemed to lean closer to hear her words. I don't take the curse from you, and I don't break it entirely. Instead, I choose to share it willingly. 2 souls bound to one ship, 2 hearts keeping each other human, 2 people making sure neither of us forgets what we're fighting for. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the battle between the 2 crews seemed to pause as the implications of her words sank in. Captain Wraith was the first to recover. Impossible. The curse doesn't allow for true love, Martha interrupted. It's designed to isolate, to corrupt through loneliness. But if 2 people freely choose to share the burden, to anchor each other against the darkness, the siren's heart's scream of rage confirmed that she was on the right track. The ruby began to spin faster, its crimson light flickering between brilliant red and sickly green as it tried to reassert control over the situation. It could work, Ezra said wonderingly, lowering his sword for the first time since the battle began. A shared curse becomes a shared strength, the heart's power divided between 2 souls instead of consuming one. But, Martha continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing, it would mean giving up any chance of a normal life. No children, no growing old together in some cottage by the sea. Just this ship, this crew, this endless voyage between worlds. Ezra looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not hope, not fear, but something that transcended both. Are you certain? This isn't a choice you can unmake. Martha glanced around the deck one more time, taking in the supernatural battle, the floating ruins of New Atlantis, the impossible beauty and terror of the threshold waters. Then she looked at Ezra, really looked at him, seeing past the scars and the supernatural aura to the man beneath, the one who had written a letter asking not for treasure or power, but for someone to share silence with. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. She reached out and took his hand, their fingers interlocking as Captain Wraith roared in fury, and the siren's heart pulsed with desperate malevolence. The moment their skin touched, Martha felt the curse flow into her, not as an overwhelming flood, but as a gentle tide that she chose to accept. The effect was immediate and profound. The scars on Ezra's face began to fade, not disappearing entirely but losing their supernatural luminescence. At the same time, Martha felt her own skin tingling as new marks appeared. Silver lines that traced patterns of waves and wind across her arms, beautiful rather than disfiguring. The widow's tide shuddered and transformed around them. The bone-white planks darkened to rich mahogany. The tattered sails became pristine canvas that caught winds from both the natural and supernatural worlds. The ghostly crew solidified into living men once again, their choice to remain vindicated by this act of willing sacrifice. Captain Wraith and his damned armada began to fade, their power over the curse diminishing as the nature of the curse itself changed. This isn't over, he raged as his ship sank back beneath the waves. Love makes you weak. It will be your downfall. Maybe, Ezra replied, his arm around Martha's waist as they watched their enemy disappear. But it's our choice to make. The siren's heart, its power broken by the act of willing partnership, cracked down the middle. Instead of the malevolent crimson glow it had emanated for so long, gentle blue light poured from the fissures, the same color as deep ocean water on a clear day. What happens to it now? Martha asked. It becomes what it was always meant to be, Timothy said, his voice clear and strong now that he lived again. A symbol of the sea's power to both destroy and preserve, to curse and to bless. The broken ruby dissolved into sparkling dust that scattered on the wind, and Martha could have sworn she heard the voices of all those who had been enslaved by its power over the centuries, whispering their thanks as they finally found peace. The threshold waters began to calm, the floating city of New Atlantis finally crumbling completely as its ghostly inhabitants found their way to whatever rest awaited them. The sun, A real sun, not the artificial light of supernatural realms, began to rise on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "So what now?" Martha asked, watching the ordinary world reassert itself around them. Ezra smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, the expression reached his eyes. "Now we sail. We help lost souls find their way, protect ships from supernatural storms, serve as guardians of the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Together, together." As the widow's tide turned toward the sunrise, Martha felt a deep contentment settle over her. She had chosen extraordinary over ordinary, but she had chosen it for the right reasons. Not power or escape from herself, but partnership with someone who understood that the most profound magic was the decision to face the unknown with another person by your side. The ship sailed on through waters that sparkled with normal morning light, carrying its crew toward whatever adventures awaited them in a world where love had proven stronger than curse, where hope had outlasted despair, and where two souls had found in each other the courage to transform damnation into redemption. And in the captain's cabin, where once a cursed ruby had pulsed with malevolent hunger, now sat 2 cups of coffee and a collection of sea charts, showing all the places in the world where lost souls might need guidance home. The widow's tide had found its true purpose at last,